The summer heat had descended upon Oak Ridge Estates like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. At 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, David Chen stood in his backyard, hands on his hips, squinting at what was once the centerpiece of his property, a 15-year-old above-ground swimming pool. Now it was nothing but a barren circle of dead grass and compressed dirt. "Good riddance," he muttered, taking a sip of coffee from his mug emblazoned with "World's Okayest Engineer." The pool had been more trouble than it was worth these past few years. Endless maintenance, chemical balancing, and the astronomical water bills that came with it, not to mention the liability insurance that kept creeping up each year. When the liner had finally torn beyond repair last season, David had made his decision. No more pool. His 13-year-old daughter Lily had thrown a fit initially, but even she had to admit that they'd used it maybe 5 times the previous summer. His wife Sandra was just relieved to have one less thing to worry about maintaining. They promised Lily more trips to the community pool and maybe even a vacation to the beach next year with the money they'd save. What David hadn't counted on was the neighborhood backlash. "You can't just remove your pool." Elaine Peterson had practically shrieked when she spotted the dismantling crew last week. She lived 3 houses down and had never once been invited to use their pool, yet somehow felt entitled to an opinion on its existence. "It affects the entire neighborhood's property values." David had politely explained that it was, in fact, his property and the above-ground pool was hardly a permanent fixture. But Elaine had stormed off, smartphone already pressed to her ear. Now, as David surveyed the flat expanse where he planned to create a garden patio, he heard the distinct sound of someone clearing their throat. He turned to find Elaine standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed tightly over her floral blouse, her blonde bob quivering with indignation. "David, I see you completed your vandalism." Her voice dripped with a particular brand of disdain reserved for homeowners who dared to violate the unwritten aesthetic codes of Oak Ridge Estates. "Good morning to you too, Elaine," David replied, forcing a smile. "Would you like some coffee? Sandra just made a fresh pot." "I'm not here for pleasantries," Elaine replied, stepping uninvited onto his lawn. "I'm here as the vice president of the Homeowners Association to inform you that you're in violation of neighborhood bylaws." David frowned. "There's nothing in the HOA rules about removing a personal pool. I checked before we started the work." Section 8, paragraph 3, Elaine recited as if reading from an invisible book. "No homeowner shall make significant alterations to their property that materially affect the character or value of the neighborhood without board approval." David took another sip of his coffee, buying time. He knew the rules backward and forward. He'd been burned once before when trying to install a satellite dish. That applies to structural changes to the house itself or permanent landscape features. A removable above-ground pool doesn't qualify. Elaine's eyes narrowed. "The board will be the judge of that. We're holding an emergency meeting on Monday." "Fantastic," David said, trying to keep his tone light even as irritation bubbled up inside him. "But until then, I'll be working on my new patio design. Have a great weekend, Elaine." He turned away, hoping she'd take the hint, but the sound of furious tapping made him glance back. Elaine had pulled out her phone and was frantically typing or dialing. "Yes, hello?" "I'd like to report a violation," she began, her voice rising loud enough for David to hear clearly. It took him a moment to process what was happening. Surely she wasn't actually. "Yes, this is an emergency," Elaine continued. "A homeowner has removed a swimming pool without proper authorization, and it represents a clear danger to community standards and property values. I need someone to come immediately to 347 Oak Ridge Drive." David nearly choked on his coffee. Elaine Peterson was calling the police over a removed swimming pool on a Saturday morning. This had to be some kind of joke. 20 minutes later, David was explaining his pool removal to his wife Sandra in their kitchen when the doorbell rang. They exchanged a look of confusion. "Are we expecting someone?" Sandra asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. David shook his head. Unless Elaine actually managed to, he trailed off, not wanting to finish the ridiculous thought. When he opened the front door, David found himself face to face with 2 police officers, a tall, lanky officer with a receding hairline who introduced himself as Officer Reeves, and a younger female officer named Martinez who seemed to be fighting back a smile. "Good morning, sir," Officer Reeves said, his expression professionally neutral. "We received a 911 call about a property dispute at this address." David felt his face flush with embarrassment. "You got to be kidding me. She actually called 911? Officer Martinez cleared her throat. "Sir, are you aware that a concerned citizen has reported you for removing a swimming pool without proper authorization?" The way she emphasized concerned citizen made it clear what she thought of Elaine's emergency call. David stepped aside, inviting them in. "Please come in. I'd like to show you the dangerous criminal activity taking place in my backyard." As they walked through the house, Sandra emerged from the kitchen, eyes wide with disbelief. "Officers, what's going on?" "Apparently removing our above-ground pool constitutes an emergency," David explained, unable to keep the sarcasm from his voice. The officers followed David through the sliding glass door into the backyard. Officer Reeves surveyed the circular patch of dead grass where the pool had been, then pulled out a small notepad. "So you removed a pool," he stated flatly. "A 15-year-old leaking above-ground pool that was on its last legs," David confirmed. "Cost me $300 to have it dismantled and hauled away last weekend." Officer Martinez walked the perimeter of the former pool area, then rejoined them. And was this pool somehow a protected historical landmark? Or perhaps it contained endangered species? David appreciated her humor. "No, just algae and my daughter's forgotten pool toys." From over the fence came the unmistakable sound of a lawn chair scraping across concrete. David glanced over to see three neighbors, the Johnsons and Mr. Petrelli, settling in with iced teas, pretending not to watch the spectacle unfolding in his yard. Officer Reeves sighed, flipping his notepad closed. "Sir, I'm going to be straight with you. We received a 911 call that classified this as an emergency threatening neighborhood stability. When the dispatcher tried to get more details, the caller insisted that unauthorized pool removal was tantamount to vandalism and demanded immediate police intervention." "That would be Elaine Peterson," David said, pointing toward her house down the street, "vice president of our HOA and self-appointed guardian of property values." As if summoned by her name, a familiar voice called from the side gate. "Officers, I see you've responded to my call. Thank goodness." Elaine Peterson came striding across the lawn in high-heeled sandals that sank into the grass with each step, making her wobble slightly. She carried a thick binder emblazoned with Oakridge Estates HOA bylaws in gold lettering. "I brought the documentation," she announced triumphantly, holding up the binder as if it were the Constitution itself. Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states. Officer Martinez interrupted gently. "Ma'am, are you the one who called 911 about a removed swimming pool?" "I am," Elaine confirmed proudly. "As vice president of the Homeowners Association, it's my responsibility to." "Ma'am," Officer Reeves cut in, his voice firmer now. 911 is for emergencies, life-threatening emergencies. Elaine blinked, seemingly confused by this clarification. "This is an emergency. For the neighborhood. Do you have any idea what this will do to our property values? The Hendersons' pool is visible from the street, but this one could be seen from the Wilsons' second-floor window. It was part of our neighborhood's appeal." By this point, two more neighbors had gathered at the fence, not even pretending they weren't watching. David noticed his daughter Lily filming the entire interaction from her bedroom window upstairs. Officer Martinez took a step toward Elaine. "Ma'am, misuse of emergency services is a serious offense. We have actual emergencies happening right now, car accidents, medical crises, real crimes in progress, while we're standing here discussing a perfectly legal home improvement decision." David couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication as Elaine's face paled. But the HOA bylaws clearly state. HOA disputes, Officer Reeves explained slowly, as if speaking to a child, are civil matters, not criminal ones, and certainly not emergencies requiring 911 dispatch. By Sunday afternoon, David Chen had become infamous in Oakridge Estates. His daughter Lily's video of pool Karen gets schooled by cops had spread through the neighborhood's group chat faster than gossip at a PTA meeting. The 15-second clip showed Elaine's face transitioning from righteous indignation to stunned disbelief as Officer Martinez explained the purpose of emergency services. "Dad, you're trending in the neighborhood," Lily announced at breakfast, sliding her phone across the table to show him the messages flooding in. David groaned. "Great, just what I wanted. Local celebrity status for removing a pool." Sandra squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "Look at the bright side, most of the neighbors are on your side." She wasn't wrong. David's phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from neighbors he barely knew, offering everything from legal advice to invitations for barbecues. The Johnsons next door had dropped off a bottle of wine with a handwritten note, to celebrating property autonomy. Even Mr. Finch, the 82-year-old retired judge at the end of the street who rarely spoke to anyone, had shuffled over that morning to shake David's hand and mutter something about standing up to petty tyrants. That not everyone was supportive. Elaine had mobilized her own faction, the three other members of the HOA board and a handful of neighbors who seemed to believe that property values were more sacred than individual rights. They had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Monday evening at the community center. David was in the backyard taking measurements for his patio project when his phone rang. The caller ID displayed Roger Hamilton, the name of the HOA president, a mild-mannered accountant who typically avoided confrontation at all costs. "Roger," David answered, trying to keep his tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" Roger's voice sounded strained. I'm calling about tomorrow's meeting. Yes, Elaine's emergency session. I got the email. David continued, measuring foam pressed between his ear and shoulder. Look, I need to warn you. Elaine is, well, she's out for blood. She's been going door to door all day with a petition to have you fined and forced to reinstall the pool. David stopped measuring, straightening up in disbelief. She can't be serious. I'm afraid she is. Roger sighed. She's even hired a real estate appraiser to assess the devaluation impact of removing a pool that was only visible from 2 other houses. This is getting ridiculous, David muttered. Roger, you know as well as I do that there's nothing in the bylaws about this. There was a long pause on the line. Actually, David, I found something. David's stomach tightened. What do you mean? In the original neighborhood covenant from 1993, there was a clause about maintaining recreational amenities once installed. It's called it's never been enforced, and frankly, I'm not even sure it's legally binding anymore, but Elaine found it. A 30-year-old clause about swing sets and trampolines. David scoffed. Come on, Roger. I know, Roger conceded. But I thought you should be prepared. Elaine's really pulling out all the stops on this one. After hanging up, David shared the news with Sandra, who took it surprisingly well. So let her have her meeting, she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. What's the worst that can happen? They fine us? We'll appeal it. David wasn't convinced it would be that simple. You don't know Elaine like I do. This isn't about the pool anymore. It's about authority. Then maybe it's time someone challenged that authority, Sandra replied, a glint in her eye that David recognized from their early dating days, the look she got right before suggesting something mildly rebellious. By Sunday evening, the Chen family had developed what Lily dubbed Operation Patio Paradise. If Elaine wanted a war over outdoor amenities, they would give her one. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. David had taken the day off work ostensibly to prepare for the evening's AOA meeting, but actually execute phase 1 of their plan. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m., a landscape delivery truck pulled up in front of their house. For 2 blessed weeks, the Chen family enjoyed their new patio without a peep from Elaine Peterson. The fire pit became the centerpiece of their outdoor life, and hardly an evening passed without neighbors dropping by to admire the space or share a drink under the stars. Sandra had added string lights that twinkled like fireflies above the slate pavers, and Lily had surprised her parents by planting flowers around the perimeter, her way of admitting that maybe the patio was better than their old leaky pool after all. It's like we've been adopted by the neighborhood, David remarked one evening as they waved goodbye to the Johnsons. I've lived here 8 years and never knew half these people's names until now. Sandra nodded, gathering empty glasses onto a tray. Nothing brings people together like a common enemy. You think she's given up? David asked, glancing in the direction of Elaine's house. The lights had been on, but there had been no sign of the HOA vice president in days. Sandra gave him a knowing look. People like Elaine don't give up. They regroup. Her words proved prophetic. The following Saturday, David opened their mailbox to find an official-looking envelope bearing the HOA letterhead. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of special HOA board election. Due to recent concerns regarding leadership decisions, a special election for all board positions will be held on June 15th. Nominations now open. Signed, Gregory Palmer, Treasurer, Elaine Peterson, Vice President, Diane Wiseman, Secretary. Conspicuously missing was Roger Hamilton's signature as President. David brought the notice inside, showing it to Sandra. Looks like a coup in progress. Sandra studied the paper. They can't just call a special election without the president's approval, can they? Before David could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Roger. Have you seen the notice? Call me. 20 minutes later, they had the full story. Roger explained that after he had approved the Chen's patio project, Elaine had rallied the other board members to invoke a rarely used bylaw allowing 3 officers to call for new elections if they believed the president had acted against the best interests of the community. She's really trying to get you removed from the board because you sided with us. David asked, incredulous. That's just the first step, Roger replied grimly. If she gets her supporters elected, her plan is to change the bylaws to give the HOA stricter control over exterior modifications. She's already drafted the amendments. Can she actually do that? With enough votes, yes. And Elaine's quite good at mobilizing the retirees who actually show up to these meetings. Most working families don't have time for HOA politics. David hung up feeling uneasy. What had started as a simple pool removal had somehow escalated into neighborhood political warfare. He shared Roger's concerns with Sandra. So what do we do? He asked. Just let her take over the HOA and change all the rules. Sandra's eyes narrowed at the same look of rebellion he'd seen before. No, we fight fire with fire. The next morning, the kitchen table had been transformed into campaign headquarters. Lily sat cross-legged in a chair, designing digital flyers on her laptop while Sandra made phone calls to neighbors they befriended during the patio project. David was reviewing the HOA charter, looking for any procedural loopholes they could use. Found something, he announced, holding up the document. Candidates for the board must be nominated by at least 5 households, and nominations close in 3 days. Sandra hung up her call, smiling triumphantly. Perfect timing. I've got 8 households willing to support your nomination. My nomination? David nearly choked on his coffee. I didn't agree to run for the board. Dad. Lily rolled her eyes in that uniquely teenage way. You have to. Otherwise, this Karen wins. By Monday evening, word had spread throughout Oak Ridge Estates. David Chen, the man who stood up to pull Karen, was running for HOA president against Elaine Peterson. The neighborhood had divided into clear factions, those who valued individual property rights versus those who believed in strict community standards. Elaine's campaign began in earnest with a flyer distributed to every mailbox. Elected PTRSon for Pirius Ident, Protiki to our PRT values, Esto pet unauthorize these modifications, preserve OAK RADG estate's character. Not to be outdone, Lily's digital flyer quickly made its rounds on the neighborhood group chat. VOTCHEN for common sense. Your home, your choices. Real EMERGNC's only community over control. The final line was accompanied by a photo of their new patio filled with smiling neighbors. As the election approached, Elaine's tactics grew increasingly desperate. 3 days before the vote, David returned home to find 2 men in suits measuring his front yard. Can I help you? He asked, locking their path to his door. 1 year later, the legendary pool incident had become neighborhood folklore. New residents moving into Oak Ridge Estates inevitably heard some version of the tale within their first week, how a simple pool removal had triggered a neighborhood revolution against HOA tyranny. Most versions ended with a dramatic retelling of the election night victory, complete with Elaine Peterson's hasty exit. But what few people knew was the story's true ending. It was a sweltering Saturday in July, almost exactly 1 year since the fateful morning when Elaine had dialed 911, when David's phone lit up with a notification. The Oak Ridge Estates community app showed a new resident had joined, Martin and Elaine Winters, 1542 Magnolia Lane. David stared at the screen in disbelief. Sandra, he called to his wife, who was pruning the flourishing garden beds that now framed their patio. You're not going to believe this. He showed her the notification. Sandra's eyebrows shot up. Elaine Peterson is back, and she's married. The for sale sign had disappeared from Elaine's old house months ago, and the neighborhood grapevine had reported she'd moved to a gated community in the next town over. No one had expected to see her again, least of all with a new last name and address within Oak Ridge Estates. Should we send a welcome basket? Sandra asked, her voice heavy with sarcasm. David chuckled. Maybe a pool toy? Over the next week, David found himself unconsciously taking detours during his evening walks to pass by 1542 Magnolia Lane. The house was modest compared to Elaine's previous residence, a single-story ranch-style home with a freshly painted blue door. Each time he passed, he half expected to see Elaine marching across the lawn with a binder of bylaws, but the property remained quiet. Then came the monthly HOA meeting. As president, David had transformed these gatherings from contentious battlegrounds into community forums. Attendance remained high, but the atmosphere was collaborative rather than combative. That evening, as neighbors filed into the community center, a hush fell over the room when Elaine walked in. She looked different. Her signature blonde bob had grown out into a softer style, and she wore casual clothes instead of her usual buttoned-up attire. Most noticeably, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a kind face, his hand resting gently on her back. David steeled himself as they approached the table where he sat with the other board members. David, Elaine said, extending her hand. It's been a while. He shook her hand, searching her face for signs of the old animosity, but finding none. Welcome back to Oak Ridge, Elaine. And you must be Martin. The man nodded, shaking David's hand with a firm grip. Martin Winters. I heard quite a bit about you. I can only imagine, David replied, unable to keep a hint of wariness from his voice. All good things recently, Martin said with a warm laugh, though I gather that wasn't always the case. The meeting proceeded normally with updates on community projects and a vote on funding for playground improvements. Elaine remained quiet throughout, occasionally whispering to Martin, but otherwise simply observing. As the meeting concluded, David was gathering his materials when he noticed Elaine approaching alone. Do you got a minute? She asked, her voice lacking its former authoritative edge. David nodded, bracing himself. They stepped outside into the warm evening air, away from curious ears. I owe you an apology, Elaine began, the words clearly difficult for her. My behavior last year was inexcusable. David tried to hide his shock. Well, I appreciate that, Elaine, though I have to admit I'm surprised to see you back in Oak Ridge. She smiled ruefully. Life has #removed my pool. Karen dialed 911. Cops thought it was a joke.